cracked a racist joke in front of the entire cabin, then ordered a black man out of first class like he was nothing. No warning, no reason, just the kind of smug, casual humiliation that only comes from a man who's done it before and gotten away with it. The passengers laughed awkwardly. The crew looked the other way. And the pilot? He stood tall at the cockpit door, proud of putting someone like that in his place. What no one realized, what not a single soul on that plane could have guessed, was that the man they just disrespected didn't just buy a seat. He owned the table everyone else was trying to sit at. This wasn't just another flight gone wrong. This was the moment an entire system tried to silence someone who had the power to take down the whole damn thing. With facts, with proof, with one well-placed signature. He didn't scream. He didn't fight. He just watched, remembered every face, every word, and made one call that changed everything. Within 72 hours, careers were ruined, deals collapsed, and the airline's polished image shattered across global headlines. If that opening hit you like it should, stick around, because the fall isn't over yet. But before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments, what would you have done in his place? Have you ever seen someone treated like they didn't belong, just because of how they look? And tell us, where in the world are you watching from? If you believe true power doesn't shout, it waits. Then like, subscribe, and stay tuned. This is the story of what happens when injustice targets the wrong man. The terminal at Los Angeles International was alive with quiet, early morning motion. Travelers moved in choreographed streams, some with the urgency of missed connections, others basking in the calm of punctuality. Among them walked Kevin Holt, tall, composed, and draped in the tailored elegance of a dark three-piece suit. His presence didn't command attention, but it certainly didn't go unnoticed. He moved like a man accustomed to respect, not flaunting power, but emanating it in the small, effortless details. The precise Windsor knot at his collar, the custom leather briefcase slung over his shoulder, the way his polished shoes clicked across the floor with calm certainty. Kevin was no stranger to first class. In fact, his company, Holt Global Strategies, routinely booked premium seats for all its C-level executives. But today's flight was personal. The London deal was finally closing. A multinational green infrastructure contract his team had fought 7 grueling months to secure. And now, it was his signature that would seal the transaction. As he reached Gate 19, the boarding screen blinked. First class boarding now. The gate agent offered a half smile, scanning his digital pass without comment. Kevin returned the nod and proceeded down the jet bridge. Inside the aircraft, the first-class cabin was a curated world of privilege. Soft leather seating, champagne already fizzing in crystal flutes, attendants speaking in hushed tones. He located 2A, the window seat, stowed his briefcase overhead, and turned to sit. That's when it happened. "Well, looks like catering let a new guy sneak up front," a voice called out, loud and amused. Kevin looked up. The cockpit door was open, and leaning casually against the frame was a man in his 50s, uniform crisp, expression smug. "Hope they're not putting the help in charge of meal service today." A few heads turned. Polite laughter echoed, too quick to be genuine. Kevin recognized the voice and the man from his pre-boarding research. Captain Lowell Drayton, 30 years with the airline, military background, never disciplined, but flagged in 2 anonymous reviews for tone and treatment of select passengers. Now, he was grinning as if his words were harmless. "You must be Captain Drayton," Kevin replied evenly. Lowell's smirk faltered, but only slightly. "And you are?" "Kevin Holt." The name registered. Kevin saw it in the flicker of recognition that crossed the pilot's face. Still, he said nothing more and disappeared into the cockpit. Kevin took his seat, back straight, hands folded over his lap. He didn't let the insult land, but he also didn't forget it. Not 10 minutes later, as other passengers trickled in, a man in a black blazer, security, and a uniformed crew supervisor approached his row. "Mr. Holt," the security officer asked, voice flat. "Yes. We need to speak with you for a moment. Could you come with us, please?" The words weren't loud, but the timing was surgical. Passengers quieted, heads swiveled. A woman in 1B raised her brows. A man 2 rows back whispered something under his breath. Cavan stood, retrieved his briefcase, and walked out with the two men. They led him to a holding room just off the terminal, where an airline supervisor waited beside a mounted monitor blinking flight statuses. "We received a report of suspicious behavior," the supervisor said. "From whom?" Cavan asked, though he already knew. "The captain. He claims you were loitering near the cockpit during boarding." Appeared agitated. Cavan looked him in the eye. "I was putting a briefcase in the overhead bin, and the only agitation came from a cockpit." The supervisor didn't blink. "Regardless, Captain Drayton has asked for your removal. We've canceled your ticket, and your fare will be refunded in full." Cavan absorbed the words like a man being told it was raining when he knew it wasn't. He gave no outburst, no protest. He simply pulled out his phone. "You're welcome to rebook with a later flight," the supervisor added hastily. But Cavan had already dialed. "Kara, it's me. Pull the Meridian contract. Effective immediately. Send a memo to Intergov. I'll explain later." A balding executive in 1C leaned toward his seatmate and muttered, "Guess they're cracking down on stowaways again," a smirk tugging at the corners of his mouth. His companion chuckled, adjusting his Rolex, as if the punchline somehow validated their privilege. Near the aisle, a younger woman in designer sunglasses slid her AirPods out just long enough to catch the gossip, then slid them back in and shook her head with a knowing grin. To them, the message was clear. Someone who didn't look the part had tried to infiltrate a space reserved for people like them. And the system, whatever that meant, had corrected it. At the rear of first class, tucked near the galley, Darcy Linwood busied herself with a pre-flight beverage inventory, her hands moving with a kind of mechanical precision that comes from years of repetition. She double-checked the champagne count, reviewed the welcome drink cards, and pretended not to hear what the passengers were saying just 10 feet away. But she had heard everything, from the snickers to the veiled slurs wrapped in polite euphemisms like comfort and expectations. And she had watched it unfold from the start. Darcy had seen Captain Drayton's expression when Mr. Holt boarded. She had recognized the glint of arrogance in his smile, the performative charm he used like a scalpel to undermine people he deemed out of place. She had heard the joke. She had caught the subtext. And when security was called, when the captain's concerns were suddenly taken as gospel without a second opinion, Darcy had done what she had always done in such moments. She stayed silent. Not because she agreed. Not because she believed Mr. Holt had done anything wrong, but because she knew the unwritten rules of survival in the airline industry. She was a single mother from Indiana with rent to pay, a daughter in community college, and 12 years of spotless service at Meridian. She knew what happened to employees who questioned captains, especially captains like Drayton. They didn't get written up. They got written off, removed from schedules, blacklisted from promotions, slowly erased. So Darcy, like the rest of the crew, kept her head down, adjusted the cuffs of her blazer, and did what was expected. She enforced the version of reality presented to her, no matter how warped it felt in her gut. As she finished counting the second tray of wine splits, the intercom crackled. "Cabin crew, prepare doors for departure." Darcy glanced toward the cockpit door as it clicked shut, sealing Drayton inside. Her jaw clenched slightly, but she said nothing. As she made her way down the aisle to perform her safety checks, her eyes briefly flicked to seat 2A, now occupied by a man in a golf pullover and earbuds, scrolling through emails as if the seat had always belonged to him. He didn't look like a VIP. He looked like someone who asked nicely and knew the right people. Darcy continued her walkthrough, murmuring the standard lines. Seatbelt fastened, tray table up, electronic devices off or in airplane mode. But her voice lacked the usual enthusiasm. As she checked the overhead bins, her thoughts wandered. She remembered the way Cavan Holt had stood, tall, composed, unapologetic. He hadn't begged. He hadn't made a scene. He had simply walked out, head high, without giving them the spectacle they subconsciously expected. That bothered her. It made the silence in the cabin feel heavier. It made her own inaction feel louder. Just before takeoff, she ducked back into the galley and pulled out the flight manifest again. There it was, Seat 2, A. Cavan Holt. No flags. No last-minute changes. No reassignment notice. It had been his seat. It was supposed to still be his seat. The captain had overridden the manifest manually, something he technically had the authority to do, but rarely exercised. That was all the confirmation Darcy needed. She knew then, beyond doubt, that what had happened wasn't protocol, it was personal. Still, she closed the manifest, tucked it away, and wiped down the counter. She didn't speak up. She didn't report it. She didn't even whisper her doubts to the junior attendant beside her, who had wide eyes and eager hands, but hadn't yet learned when to ask questions and when to shut up. Darcy simply carried on, slipping into the rhythm of service, the ritual of distraction. But the knot in her stomach stayed tight, and the voice in her head, the one she had silenced 100 times before, was louder now, accusing her not of complicity, but of cowardice. Out in the cabin, passengers had returned to their routines. Some were watching movies. Some were sipping wine. A few had already fallen asleep, lulled by the soft hum of the engines and the illusion of peace. No one mentioned the man who'd been removed. No one asked where he went or why. In their minds, he had simply disappeared, filed away under problem resolved and erased from their experience. The walls were bone white, the chairs rigid, and the only window, a narrow pane of shatterproof glass, looked out onto the jet bridge where moments ago his seat had been snatched from him without warning, explanation, or cause. Time moved slower here, not measured in minutes, but in silence. No one had officially detained him, yet no one had allowed him to leave. They called it a safety observation hold, a vague euphemism that sounded clinical and harmless, but tasted like suspicion and control. The door opened and a security supervisor entered, clipboard in hand, eyes darting to the corners of the room before landing on cabin with the tight-lipped expression of a man caught between duty and discomfort. "Mr. Holt," he said without sitting down, "this is just a temporary protocol while we assess some inconsistencies flagged by the flight crew." Cabin leaned forward, voice calm but laced with steel. "What inconsistencies?" "My identification matched. My ticket scan clean. Your manifest listed me in 2A. So explain to me precisely what requires assessment." The supervisor hesitated, then glanced at the door as if wishing for an escape route. "The captain expressed concerns," he said at last, "and we're obligated to respond when a senior flight officer flags a potential incident." "A potential incident?" Cabin echoed, incredulous. "Did he mention what that might be? My briefcase? My posture? My skin tone?" The supervisor flinched slightly, but said nothing, simply scribbled something on his clipboard that Cabin knew wouldn't mean anything in the long run. It wasn't about truth. It was about delay, denial, and distraction. The door clicked shut again, leaving him alone once more. An hour passed, maybe more. The second hand on the wall clock mocked him with its measured ticks. Then, without warning, a different man entered. He wasn't security. He wore a brown service uniform with grease marks along the sleeve and an ID badge clipped loosely to his collar. The man didn't introduce himself, just looked at Cabin with a quick, knowing glance and leaned close enough for only him to hear. "You didn't do anything wrong," he muttered, eyes darting toward the hallway, voice no louder than a whisper. "This isn't the first time he's done it." Cabin's expression didn't change, but something sharpened behind his gaze. "Captain Drayton," the man said, wiping his hands on a cloth. "We've had incidents. Passengers removed. Always people of color. Always quiet. Never escalated. Just like this." Cabin raised an eyebrow. "And you are?" "Tobias. Tobias Shard. I work systems and diagnostics, mostly black box and cockpit data integrity," he explained quickly, still keeping his tone low. "Look, I shouldn't be in here, but I saw your name come up flagged as a passenger of interest. That's not normal, especially not when it's cleared by security with zero justification. So why tell me?" Cabin asked, still composed. Tobias swallowed. "Because I've been watching this happen for too long. And this time it wasn't just a whisper. I saw the override on the seating manifest. It came directly from the cockpit. Manual entry, not system reroute. That means he forced a change." Cabin leaned back, processing the information like a chess player observing an unexpected opening on the board. Do you have proof? Not yet, Tobias admitted. They scrub logs after 30 minutes if it's marked captain's discretion. But I can dig. I can try. Then do it, Cavan said, his voice flat but resolute. You've got one shot. Use it. As Tobias slipped out of the room the same way he'd entered, Cavan's mind was already 5 steps ahead. He had the beginnings of a pattern, a name, and a motive. Now he just needed evidence and the right moment to detonate it. The hold stretched into its 3rd hour. No charges, no paperwork, no explanation, just the slow burn of bureaucracy used as a weapon. Mr. Holt, she said, her voice strained with the effort of corporate politeness. You've been temporarily suspended from all Meridian-operated flights, pending an internal review. Cavan's jaw tightened, but his expression didn't crack. On what grounds? He asked. The agent swallowed hard, clearly uncomfortable. The captain filed a report of non-compliant behavior. The system flagged it. I'm just the messenger. Cavan took the envelope slowly, aware that several passers-by were watching the exchange from a distance. He opened it. Inside was a single printed memo from Meridian's Corporate Passenger Affairs Office stating that due to elevated concerns regarding flight security protocol breaches, his account was under immediate suspension until further notice. It didn't say he had broken any rules. It didn't provide any evidence. It just labeled him as a variable, one to be neutralized quietly. The message was clear. This wasn't about rules. This was about power. Cavan turned, walked away from the gate with steady steps, and exited the terminal into the muggy morning air outside arrivals. He dialed Tobias immediately. They're doubling down, he said. I'm off the grid now. Tobias replied with a breathless update. I pulled the cabin camera files from 2A. Or, at least I tried. There's a 10-minute blackout, from the moment you boarded to the moment you were removed. Cavan stopped in his tracks. A blackout. Tobias confirmed. It's not a glitch. It's a system-level overwrite. Someone purged the footage manually. Cavan's eyes narrowed. And you're sure? Positive, Tobias said. It leaves a log trail in the archive. Whoever did it had admin clearance. Cavan didn't need to guess who. A system blackout on a luxury carrier's flagship aircraft wasn't an accident. It was a cover-up. That meant they weren't just dismissing him. They were erasing him. But they had made one critical mistake. They had underestimated who he really was. Later that afternoon, in a glass tower overlooking Century City, Meredith Wynn, Vice President of Risk Mitigation for Meridian, sat at the head of a polished oak conference table. Around her were 6 other executives, all with tight schedules and tighter agendas. On the screen behind her flashed the internal flag. Subject: Holt, Cabin Incident 312, Flag Disruption. Meredith glanced through the summarized report. Passenger resisted seat reassignment. Passenger questioned cockpit authority. Passenger elevated tone during crew communication. Not once did the report mention race. Not once did it include Cavan's title or background. It was sterilized, deliberately so. Any blowback? One exec asked. Meredith shook her head. None so far. PR will sit on this unless he speaks publicly. And if he does, we'll frame it as an isolated misunderstanding. The room nodded in agreement. No one questioned the captain's authority. No one cared that the system had conveniently purged the only visual record. It wasn't about truth. It was about optics. Freeze his loyalty status, Meredith added. Just in case. A young assistant at the end of the table typed rapidly, adding Cavan's name to a digital blacklist that would quietly ripple across every major airline partner under Meridian's corporate web. Meanwhile, across town, Cavan entered the offices of Holt Global Strategies. It was a modern fortress of glass and steel, built not just for business, but for leverage. Inside, his executive team was already moving. Amelia North, head of litigation, had pulled every compliance statute tied to passenger rights. Marco DeWitt, cyber lead, had begun scanning metadata from Tobias's logs. And Samara, his chief of intel, handed him a dossier on every complaint filed against Captain Lowell Drayton in the last 10 years. 6 incidents, 3 settlements, 0 disciplinary actions. The pattern was there, and now, so was the motive. They tried to wipe you, Samara said. But they didn't expect you'd see it coming. Cavan nodded. They used the same playbook one too many times. It's time we write the next chapter. His photo, taken without consent at the airport, mid-stride, briefcase in hand, was plastered at the top of a sensational headline. Business class breakdown. Unruly passenger removed from Meridian flight after disruption. The article, published on a widely syndicated travel and aviation news platform, described a combative individual who refused to comply with safety instructions and escalated tension among crew and fellow passengers. It made no mention of Drayton's racist joke. It skipped over the security footage conveniently erased. And it never once used Cavan's full name, referring to him only as the man. But Cavan recognized the author instantly. Jesse Calden, former journalist turned corporate fixer, currently director of strategic media relations at Meridian Airlines, and, more notably, Drayton's fraternity brother from undergrad. They had served on the same university aviation alumni board for over a decade. The ties weren't just personal, they were structural. Old boys protecting old systems. In the article's final paragraph, Jesse included a quote from an anonymous crew source, stating that the passenger in question displayed erratic behavior inconsistent with professional travel standards. It was deliberately vague but cutting, the kind of language that allowed readers to fill in the blanks with their own prejudice. And judging by the comment section, it worked. Another entitled nobody, one user wrote. Bet he upgraded using points or some DI scam, said another. Glad they kicked him off, should have grounded him permanently. The vitriol flooded in, fast and unfiltered. But what stung most wasn't the hate. It was the orchestration, the timing of the article, the precision of the narrative. The way it dropped just hours after Meridian's legal team internally marked the case as closed. It was damage control disguised as journalism. Inside Holt Global Strategies, Cavan stood in the command room, surrounded by his most trusted advisors. The massive wall display was split across 6 feeds, one showing live media coverage, one tracking social engagement, and 4 displaying corporate intel dashboards. Samara, with her eyes sharp as razors, zoomed in on the article metadata. The piece was written last night, scheduled for auto-publish at 5:01 a.m., she confirmed. They drafted the headline before you even left the terminal. Amelia stepped in, flipping through a printed dossier. Jesse's name is all over Meridian's internal PR directives. He ghostwrites executive statements, handles incident spin, even moderates internal crisis chat threads. This isn't rogue. It's institutional. Cavan nodded once, not out of surprise, but because the last piece of the puzzle had snapped into place. The silence, the erasure, the smear. It was all part of a preemptive containment protocol, one crafted not just to protect a single captain, but to preserve the illusion of purity that airlines like Meridian sold to their most valued customers. Marco entered the room holding a printed timeline. There's something else, he said. We traced internal comms through Tobias's access. 10 minutes after Drayton filed his report, Jesse received a flagged update marked Priority Optics Possible Escalation. That's when the media machine kicked in. Samara tapped into the data overlay and pulled up archived screenshots. They had a media script ready before they even filed the incident report to the FAA, she added. That's not reaction. That's choreography. Cavan's voice cut through the tension. How far did they push it? Amelia answered before anyone else could. Far enough that 3 affiliate news stations and 2 aviation blogs picked it up within 2 hours. The keywords being circulated are aggression, defiance, and security risk. Cavan turned back to the display, watching the wave of misinformation sweep across screens like wildfire. In a world obsessed with optics, truth was a commodity easily replaced by spin. But what they didn't know, what Jesse hadn't counted on, was that Cavan wasn't just another executive. He was a strategist. And he'd been quietly building his counterstrike since the moment they forced him off that plane. Later that afternoon, Cabin placed a direct call to a contact at the Federal Aviation Oversight Board, a woman named Carla Breen, who had once served beside him on a global aviation ethics task force. "Carla," he said, "I need an independent review opened. Flight 312, Meridian Air. There's falsified documentation, missing security footage, and a media campaign engineered before any formal investigation." They didn't know the call was already being logged, silently, invisibly, through a mirror server that had been compromised months ago by one of Holt Global's subcontracted cybersecurity firms. What they didn't know was this: if Kevin Holt pressed forward with a lawsuit, if he went public with allegations of discrimination and procedural manipulation, it could unravel not only the Drayton incident, but an entire archive of similarly buried complaints. That morning, Kevin received an encrypted message routed through an offshore server. The contents were simple and signed, but unmistakably deliberate. "If you pursue litigation, you'll be flagged as a volatile actor across our industry partners. Think carefully. Quiet exits preserve reputations." Kevin read the message twice, unmoved. The threat wasn't subtle. It was a warning that they'd blacklist him from every major carrier in their alliance, effectively grounding his ability to travel on executive tiers across international networks. It was a pressure tactic, one designed to isolate without formal accusation. But Kevin had seen this exact play before, in corporate boardrooms, hostile takeovers, and manipulated M&A negotiations. When power couldn't win with truth, it used fear. And like every time before, Kevin refused to blink. While Meridian's legal machine spun beneath the surface, someone else was watching from within. Miravas, a senior-level systems engineer at Meridian's Data Compliance Division, had worked quietly in the background for almost 6 years. She was a code purist, obsessed with redundancy and digital forensics. Mira didn't know Kevin personally, but she'd followed his work, the infrastructure models in Nairobi, the energy deal in Morocco, the AI-driven water optimization project in Jakarta. So when she saw his name appear in the server logs under a Level 3 incident review, she noticed something that didn't sit right. The server logs were incomplete. The flight surveillance data was purged locally, just as Tobias had warned, but unlike most deletions, this one had a tracer tag. Override by admin ID _7849 Drayton. Myra's heart stopped for a moment. That level of access belonged only to captains or senior data admins. The name wasn't coded, it was literal. Drayton had manually erased the surveillance segment. Mira didn't file a report. She made a copy. Quietly, she used a fallback archive sequence, a fail-safe backup node stored in a sandbox environment only accessed during data recovery drills. Within 2 hours, she found what no one wanted recovered: the deleted footage. It wasn't just blurry, overhead visuals. It had full audio, and it captured everything. The moment Kevin stepped into the cabin, the exact words Drayton said, the laughter from the cockpit door, the raised eyebrow from a steward, the total absence of aggression from the man they later accused of being disruptive. Mira didn't speak to her manager. She didn't notify her team. Instead, she routed a secured version to an anonymous upload node Holt Global had been running for years as part of a corporate whistleblower program. Then she erased her fingerprints from the transfer, but not before setting one last trap: a watch node embedded within the backup file that would notify her the moment someone opened or tried to alter it. Back at Holt Global, Kevin received a notification from Samara just past noon. "We have the footage," she said flatly. "All of it, uncut, recovered from their backup layer by a source we're tracing." Kevin didn't ask how. He simply nodded. The room shifted. What had started as an accusation now became proof. And proof was power. Amelia stepped forward. "We release it now, they'll deny, claim it's been doctored, try to spin it as retaliation." "So we don't release it yet," Kevin replied. "Not until we've exposed the rest of the pattern." "Which pattern?" Marco asked. Kevin stared at the monitor, displaying 6 years' worth of flagged internal memos. The one where this wasn't the first time, just the most visible. He hadn't filed a public lawsuit. Instead, he had initiated something far more strategic: a call to Geneva, followed by 2 encrypted memos to the acquisitions team in London, and finally a personal directive to suspend all ongoing legal reviews until after what he called Phase 2. At precisely 3 p.m., Cavan entered the Tressler Executive Briefing Center, where 12 division heads across global markets were seated in a sleek, soundproof conference room. Amelia, Samara Marco, and his general counsel joined remotely, their faces framed on the surrounding screens. No one spoke until Cavan did. "The situation with Meridian," he began, "is no longer an incident. It's a litmus test." He paced slowly, every step deliberate. "We are currently in the final stages of formalizing a $1.2 billion global services partnership with an airline whose internal governance just attempted to smear, silence, and remove a client based solely on racial bias. That client, gentlemen and ladies, was me." The room fell still. A few executives exchanged stunned glances. Others leaned forward, processing what they'd just heard. Only Amelia, steady as always, remained expressionless. "We recovered evidence proving manual deletion of surveillance footage," she added, "unauthorized data manipulation, a coordinated PR campaign led by someone with personal ties to the crew, and a hidden blacklisting system designed to suppress legal exposure. This is not a breach, it's a culture." Cavan stopped at the head of the table. "We are not in the business of investing in broken systems. I'm initiating a full withdrawal from the Meridian integration package. That includes fleet modernization contracts, terminal infrastructure investments, and all secondary tech grants linked to the alliance." The room reacted as expected, some in shock, others in agreement, but no one argued. Because everyone in that room knew exactly what Tressler Holdings represented. Not just capital, not just leverage, but reputation. And if Tressler cut ties publicly, it wouldn't be just a corporate sting. It would be a scarlet letter. Later that evening, inside Meridian's headquarters in Atlanta, the boardroom lights burned late. The emergency meeting had been called just 20 minutes after Tressler's legal team delivered the termination letter. Cold, concise, and utterly final. Meredith stared at the screen in disbelief. "This can't be right," she muttered, scrolling through the document. "We've been working with their team for 11 months. They were set to go live in Q3. Benjamin Wakefield's face paled. "They pulled everything. Not just the equity leverage. They've pulled brand alignment, Cotec Dev, even the loyalty platform integration." A silence fell over the boardroom. And then, slowly, someone asked the question they had all overlooked. "Who signed it?" Benjamin clicked into the digital signature block. When the name appeared, no one breathed. Cavan D. Holt, Chief Executive Officer, Tressler Holdings International. The same name filed in the flight report. The same man they'd kicked off the plane. The same man they had tried to smear, erase, and blacklist. In that moment, the reality hit like a thunderclap. Not just that they had lost the deal, but that the man they had condescended to was the very force behind the capital they were depending on for long-term survival. Across the table, Meredith rubbed her temples. "We didn't just lose an investment," she said quietly. "We insulted the boardroom." The atmosphere was a toxic mix of disbelief, denial, and creeping dread. At the head of the table, Leland Bragg, Vice President of Global Strategy, known for his bluster and dismissive bravado, leaned back in his chair, arms folded across his chest, wearing the smug grin of a man too insulated to recognize a shift in the tide. "We're seriously letting some PR stunt derail this deal," he scoffed, gesturing to the document. "You're telling me we're letting a low-tier diversity hire with an axe to grind walk away with $1 billion handshake just because he threw a tantrum over seating?" Meredith tried to interject, but Leland rolled over her. "This whole guy's just trying to make noise. He's probably someone's pet exec they roll out when they need face value in a press photo. Trust me, we go radio silent. He fades in 2 weeks. He's not a threat. He's a headline." The silence that followed was not agreement. It was stunned disbelief. And then Benjamin Wakefield, pale and tight-jawed, rotated his laptop screen for Leland to see. It displayed the consolidated investment portfolio of Tressler Holdings International. Leland leaned forward, still dismissive, until he saw it. In bold center screen, Meridian Airlines Holdings 18.4% equity held via Tressler Private Equity Division. His lips parted, but no sound came out. Meredith's voice cut through the room like ice. He doesn't just own our future deals. He owns our present value. Kevin Holt isn't a PR stunt. He's one board vote away from dissolving our top 3 growth projects. The smug grin vanished from Leland's face, replaced by a hollow disbelief that twisted his features into something pathetic. We didn't know, he muttered. But it was too late, because now they all knew. The man they had laughed at, dismissed, erased. He was the power behind their own foundation. The man they tried to diminish was the same man funding their seat at the table. By midday, Kevin called for a press conference. Not a spectacle, not revenge, just clarity. The venue was understated, a private hall in Manhattan, minimalist and modern. No fanfare, no theatrics, just a podium, a screen, and a room full of reporters already brimming with questions. Kevin stood before them, composed in a dark tailored suit, his tone even and deliberate. I have no interest in playing victim, he began. What happened aboard Flight 312 is not a first for me, and that's the problem. It's not a first for any black traveler who's ever been told they don't belong in a space they pay to be in. He paused, eyes scanning the room. This wasn't about a seat. It was about a system, one that defends its gatekeepers with silence, policy loopholes, and threats. But I didn't come here today for sympathy. I came to release something. At that moment, the lights dimmed and the screen behind him flickered to life. The footage played. Clean, unedited, time-stamped. Viewers saw the exact moment Kevin entered the plane, heard the joke, heard the laughter, saw the calm in his face, the complete absence of aggression, the professionalism that contrasted starkly with the captain's arrogance. Then the audio switched to a clip no one had yet heard. It was a recording from the cockpit intercom, quietly captured during the pre-flight delay. Drayton's voice, unmistakable, said, "Some people think money gives them access to our space. But money doesn't change who belongs and who doesn't. I don't care what badge he flashes, he's not one of us." Gasps rose from the audience. Kevin let the clip finish, then turned back to the microphone. "That," he said simply, "is why the deal's off." In the hours that followed, the footage went viral. Every news outlet, social channel, and investigative blog picked it up. Hashtag Seat 312 trended worldwide. Civil rights leaders called for audits of all major airline bias protocols. FAA oversight expanded their inquiry into a full-scale investigation. Within Meridian's own halls, HR requests for legal protection skyrocketed. And inside the same boardroom where Leland had dismissed Kevin as a low-tier PR exec, silence reigned like a funeral march. The footage, once dismissed as irrelevant or inaccessible, now looped across every news outlet, drawing outrage not just from the public, but from shareholders, regulatory bodies, and global equity firms tied to the company's long-term financial health. Overnight, investor confidence plummeted. On Wall Street, analysts flagged Meridian as high risk, citing gross ethical failure and irreparable PR damage in bold red type. The stock dropped 9% in a single day. On the second day, it fell another 10%. By Friday morning, $200 million in market value had been erased. Inside headquarters, the response was swift and brutal. The board, desperate to salvage what remained of the company's reputation, launched a full internal review and retained an independent investigative firm with ties to the Department of Transportation. Before the review could even begin, heads had already started to roll. Captain Lowell Drayton was the first. He received his termination notice in a sealed envelope handed to him in the pilot's lounge, escorted off the premises without access to his locker. His last recorded words to a colleague before being removed were, "All I did was speak my mind." That mind, however, now represented a legal liability that no corporate counsel was willing to defend. His pension? Frozen. His license? Flagged for review. His name? Publicly listed in the company's disciplinary file. The first pilot to ever appear there in Meridian's 42-year history. Darcy Linwood, the senior flight attendant who had remained silent through it all, was next. While she had not directly contributed to the discrimination, her documented awareness and subsequent inaction constituted a violation of duty to report. The termination letter cited failure to intervene in breach of ethics policy. She received the notice through HR's remote platform, her employee profile deactivated before she could log back in. Jesse Calden, the architect of the misinformation campaign, faced perhaps the harshest blow. As director of media relations and the one who had crafted the false narrative designed to preemptively discredit Kevin Holt, he was not only fired, but named in the FAA's inquiry as a potential conspirator in a corporate cover-up. His email was subpoenaed, his past PR files opened. What they found was staggering. The investigation revealed a coordinated media suppression model within Meridian's communications department, complete with playbooks labeled Incident Optics Management and internal language guides on how to avoid direct acknowledgement of racial bias. Under pressure from legal exposure, the board approved full cooperation with federal regulators. A comprehensive audit uncovered 37 incidents spanning 3 years in which passengers, primarily black, brown, or ethnically ambiguous, were reassigned, detained, or removed from flights under similar vague citations. None of these cases were escalated. All were internally categorized under resolved at crew discretion. Not a single one resulted in disciplinary action until now. By Sunday, the Federal Aviation Oversight Commission opened a formal investigation into Meridian's compliance structures, launching subpoenas for internal documents, staff emails, and personnel files. Class action firms began recruiting former passengers who had similar experiences. The National Civil Liberties Forum issued a statement calling Meridian's system a machine of systemic exclusion masked by corporate courtesy. Stockholders demanded an emergency vote to restructure executive leadership. Meredith Wynn resigned before the vote could take place, leaving her office empty and her name already removed from the executive web directory. Throughout the chaos, Kevin remained silent. He made no further public appearances. He gave no interviews. He simply let the consequences unfold on their own, knowing that truth, once released, did not require further amplification. It moved with its own momentum. The damage was not just reputational, it was structural. Contracts evaporated. Loyalty programs were suspended. Airline alliances issued statements of review and concern, signaling distancing without severance. But in effect, Meridian had become radioactive. Meanwhile, Tobias Shard and Miravoss were both offered whistleblower protection packages and relocation stipends from a third-party legal fund tied quietly to Tressler Holdings. Their bravery had been critical. Their lives were now forever changed. Inside Holt Global, Amelia reviewed acquisition opportunities. Their Asia-Pacific assets are going to be up for grabs soon, she noted. They're hemorrhaging credibility. 3 weeks after the scandal shattered Meridian Airlines from the inside out, the media frenzy had begun to slow, not from lack of interest, but because the damage had already been done and accountability had been publicly served. The headlines shifted to newer stories, but the impact remained etched into the airline industry like a scar across polished metal, visible, permanent, undeniable. Inside a quiet cafe on the Lower East Side of Manhattan, far from the corporate towers and camera lenses, Kevin Holt sat alone at a corner table with a cup of coffee and a folder in hand. He wore no suit today, no tie or watch that screamed status. Just a navy sweater and worn jeans, the kind of clothes that allowed him to move through the city like any other man. He was waiting for someone he never thought he'd see again. At exactly 11:04 a.m., the door opened and in stepped Lowell Drayton. The former captain looked 10 years older than he had during the confrontation on Flight 312. His once straight posture now carried a quiet weight, and the crisp precision that had defined his uniformed life had been replaced by a look of silent reckoning. He removed his cap as he approached the table. "Mr. Holt," he said, voice low, uncertain. Kevin didn't rise, but gestured toward the empty seat across from him. "Captain Drayton." Lowell sat down slowly, as if unsure whether he deserved the seat. For a long moment, neither spoke. The city moved outside the windows, cars passing, people rushing, life continuing, unaware of the redemption unfolding inside. "I didn't come to justify anything," Lowell began, his hands folded tightly. "I've been watching the tapes, reading the coverage. I deserved what happened. But there's something I need you to know." Cabin nodded once. "Go on." Lowell's voice trembled, not with weakness, but with restraint. "I joined the Air Force when I was 22. Thought it would make me equal. Thought putting on a uniform would earn me respect. But during my first tour, they left me behind. Literally. I was the only white officer embedded with a black squadron. I got cut off during a mission, and they pulled the unit early. They never looked back. I spent 3 days in the jungle because they assumed I was safe. I wasn't." He looked up, his eyes tired but honest. "I spent the rest of my career climbing back to a place where I could be the one making the decisions. But somewhere along the way, I started using that control to punish the people I thought had abandoned me, even if they looked nothing like the ones who did." Cavan listened in silence. He didn't interrupt. He didn't soften. But he didn't judge either. Lowell leaned back, exhaling slowly. "I ruined everything. My career. My name. I lost my house. My wife left. I don't blame them. I wouldn't want to live with the man I became either." Cavan finally set the folder on the table and slid it across. "Open it," he said simply. Lowell hesitated, then did. Inside was a proposal marked with the letterhead of the Holt Foundation, a nonprofit focused on dismantling racial barriers in aviation, engineering, and global transport. At the center of the proposal was a new initiative, the Captain's Course, a scholarship and mentorship program designed to recruit, train, and elevate minority youth into the flight deck. And under the signature block, Advisor, Lowell Drayton, pending acceptance. Lowell stared at the page, stunned. "I don't understand," he whispered. Cavan's voice was calm but resolute. "You spent your life flying, but you were navigating pain, not purpose. I can't undo what happened to you, but you can help ensure it doesn't happen to the next kid who looks like me, or like you. If you want to make it right, this is how." Lowell blinked back something in his eyes. "You trust me? After everything?" Cavan nodded. "No, I'd hold you accountable. But I believe people can change when they want to, not when they're forced to. That's what separates power from principle." The former pilot sat in silence, staring down at the offer that could redefine his legacy, not as a man who fell, but as one who stood up again and lifted others with him. Finally, he reached into his coat, pulled out a pen, and signed. For the first time in years, his hands stopped shaking. Later that month, the first class of Captain's Course cadets took their seats in the Flight Simulator Training Center, greeted not by uniformed bureaucrats, but by two men standing side by side, one who had once been denied a seat, and one who had once denied it. Together, they spoke not of shame, but of growth. The message was simple. Justice wasn't just punishment, it was restoration. Redemption didn't erase the past. It rewrote the future. The end. If this story moved you, don't forget to like the video and subscribe for more powerful narratives like this one. We'd love to hear what you think. What moment shocked you the most? Did you expect Cavan's true identity? And what would you have done in his place? Let us know in the comments, and tell us where in the world you're watching from. Your voice matters, and your thoughts make these stories come alive.